everyone, welcome back to the Ecclesia Podcast episode 4. And so today's episode we're going to be trying to tackle this interesting question of why should one if should one celebrate or participate in Halloween, and we'll dive a little bit deeper into that. I hope with this episode you can answer questions beyond just Halloween. I chose Halloween only because this episode specifically will be released, I believe, on 10/18, which meant it's right before Halloween, so it's in conversation, people are thinking about it. So I thought I'd pick Halloween, but this question itself could be asked in a lot of different contexts of should I do this, should I do that, should I, how do we approach this, how do we discuss it, is what I really want to ask. This episode, disclaimer, is also a little bit more historically heavy, which means that there's a lot more detail and understanding where things came from than the other ones, which are, majorly from what we know, what we've seen, the experiences we had. So if I do, look at my iPad a little bit more frequently, please forgive me. I just want to be able to bring you the right content and things and display it and project it to you correctly. So this question of should, Christians specifically celebrate Halloween, and Christians specifically, because this answer definitely does change outside of it. There's a biblical understanding and then there's a secular, which we'll analyze both, and hopefully, you'll be able to understand those both sides. And so in October, right, October 31st is Halloween, and it's a huge holiday. It's widely spread. I'm sure right now, when this episode is released, Halloween movies have spiked up. Talks of candy have spiked up. You probably, if you're within that space, I guess you've been invited to Halloween parties. There's events and things going on that are about this Halloween because of how big it actually is. And before I got started, before we dive a little deeper into this question, there's two things I really want to point out, and that is, for example, if we're given the question of should we celebrate Halloween, there's two words there I want to define properly, and that is celebrate and Halloween. Halloween in terms of defining the origins, things like that. So what does celebrate mean, right? And so I'm going to read it off directly. Merriam-Webster pointed out, which I think was a solid definition. It basically means to honor an occasion, especially in solemn ceremonies, by refraining from ordinary business. So basically, if you're taking time out of your day to recognize this holiday, then you're celebrating it, which basically means that, okay, I'm taking time out of my day, free time or whatever it may be, to recognize, okay, I'm doing this for Halloween. And that's what it means to celebrate. When we celebrate Good Friday or Communion Day or Christmas even, we're taking time to say, look, this happened, and as a result, we're going to dedicate part of my time. For example, later on in the video, I'll definitely discuss fasting, but fasting is taking one of your desires and basically saying, look, I'm putting it aside, giving it to God. Basically killing your own desires and following the desires of God. So when you're celebrating, you are taking time, your desire to spend a million other things to do, right? Our time is very valuable, but putting it towards God. And so the reason why it's important to define what celebrate means is because, one, a lot of people don't necessarily celebrate in that sense, and two, it's more so a partaking and a participating in it. And so you'll see how that definition definitely helps in either understanding or helps against, makes you even more, put you farther away from, Halloween itself. So celebrate, right? Again, taking time, putting some thought, and actually your heart is towards, giving some time for it and participating. My family is majority Hindu, right? A little bit about me, majority Hindu, which means that I've gone to prayers and what we call jandis throughout my life. And of course, obviously, by this whole podcast, I'm Christian. I was a Christian back then. My dad is Christian, and so I grew up in that Christian setting, both my brother and I. So when we go there, there's idols on the floor. There's what we call a pandit, or that's basically their preacher pastor. And so he's giving this word in front of these idols. They're giving the food to idols and money to idols and all these things. And while that's so pagan, and that's a whole separate conversation of Hinduism and all these different religions. But as much as I was there, I sat in the seat, I watched it happen. I technically not partook in, like, the ceremony, but I was sitting there, I was physically there, I participated somehow by my mother's will. um, but I didn't celebrate it. Whatever they were doing, it's not something where it's not where my heart was. So there's cases in which you've seen it happen, you've been exposed to it, but I wouldn't say that's where my heart is. And so I really want to point that out, because a lot of people operate on that line of, I'm there, but I'm not. My heart's not in there. My heart actually points to God, and so we want to make sure we handle this correctly. So the second thing I really wanted to point out is Halloween, the origins of Halloween, where it came from. What do we do about it? What's going on here? Because I want you to know the roots of it, just so you can know what to do now. Because the roots are important. The roots and foundations of anything are important. So let's define Halloween. And so, first, take a brief look at and discuss the origins, right? To discuss it, we'd have to go a little farther back. Halloween starts with the Samhain tradition in the Celts, and so there are a group of people, the Celts, and they celebrated the Samhain tradition. And so, just to read off the bullet points, right? Their holiday was, believed to be celebrated at the end of summer and the start of winter. And the reason for this is partly due to the fact of, as summer ended, basically life kind of ended and death started to come in, because, well, the plants started to die, the animals had to be readjusted. They believed that was a distinction between death, and as a result, ghosts could kind of run freely. And there was a gray line between that, and so gray line between life and death. So now all of a sudden, ghosts can start to walk around freely and do whatever they like. So, right, and as a result, again, they believed in the ground. They got their food from the ground. So as plants started to die, and their cattle had to, they had to shave off some cattle, and basically animals. So death kind of started to come in. And so in this time period, they lit these huge bonfires and wore these costumes, right? The bonfires probably keep them warm, and the costumes and stuff, which we'll go a little bit later on, because I think that's interesting. And they did this in, I guess, celebration or in reverence to this time period that they attributed to death. And so after the Romans took them over, right, we're gonna condense this time a little bit. But as the Romans took them over, they began to use this holiday as the day of passing of their dead, right? Again, you see this recurring theme of dead and spirits. So the first Samhain's, right, introduction, end of summer, start of winter. Romans took it over. It's still kind of death-centric and spirit-centric, that ghosts still run around. And so as Christian tradition started to take over, they began to take the effect of most of the regions. And so Pope Boniface, I hope I said that correctly, probably butchered it though, the fourth, repurposed the holiday as All Saints Day. And so, to be honest, if you look at the time period, it is super pagan, so it was kind of a business move, and they made it their own, basically. And it was celebrated similar to the Celts of dressing up and the fires, and eventually from this it would reach the name, Halloween. And so after Halloween makes its way to the Americans, the traditions were the same: dressing up and leaving out candy. And this specific tradition of dressing up, leaving out candy, which I mentioned before, started because, well, dressing up, one, they didn't want the ghosts and the spirits to recognize them, so they dress up, hide their faces, hide who they are, dress up, hide themselves. They'd leave out candy, leave out food back then. Now we leave out candy so that if the spirits came to their home, they wouldn't enter. So it was really these specific traditions, which we've really made just a part of our every culture around this time, came from protecting themselves against ghosts. So really want to point that out. And then Halloween eventually becomes one of the most celebrated times of the year, right? Annually, I believe, right, from research, last year, 2023, Halloween brought in $12 billion, or Americans paid $12 billion just last year on Halloween. It's one of the highest, I guess, grossing holidays, if you had to look at it that way. And so we've defined what Halloween is briefly, and we've defined what Celebrate is. So, as Christians, you're probably asking the question, there's a lot of Christian stuff here, so why in the world would you mention this? Not really Christian, it's a bunch of paganism, death, and spirits. So how does this relate to us? Well, history-wise, it doesn't have much to do with us, but not once also is Halloween mentioned in the Bible. And that's because, well, Halloween wasn't a thing as much back then as it is now. And the churches, ironically, it's not something that's openly discussed. For example, I've been to church my whole life, and pastors themselves even wouldn't mention topics like this because they know, well, the church community is quite divided. Like topics of, should you drink alcohol, or should you go to Halloween, and should you dress up? Or should you not? It's not something discussed. Well, because one, you lose probably a large group of people business-wise, and two, it's super, I guess, not opinionated, but you'll see why. It's a lot harder to just, and we'll see how to approach it, right? Give it a second. So, with that said, right, how does this relate to us as Christians? How does this relate to our everyday life? And so this question specifically, as mentioned, is really 1 or 0, right? It's a binary question. Either you want nothing to do with it, or either you want something to do with it. And so my goal in this episode specifically is not to give you that, clear cut, you shouldn't or you should, but give you the tools and the necessary knowledge to understand how to approach it, how should we answer it internally, and where should we go to answer it. And so I hope that if you are a Christian, if you are someone who partakes or participates in Halloween, or if you're someone who doesn't and doesn't want anything to do with it, that you can at least take away one thing. So first part I really want to focus on, why don't Christians celebrate it? Or why don't Christians participate in Halloween in the first? Where did this hard no, I want nothing to do with it, I want to keep that far away from me as possible come from? And I've laid out a few reasons, and these reasons aren't necessarily from research. It's just from what I've seen growing up and the experiences I've had, right? So I'm going to read out the reasons and just to go and analyze them to see, okay, well, what are we working with here? So it's because of the roots of Halloween. We've discussed the origins of Halloween, and we've seen where it comes from, what to do about it, like the foundations and the roots of it. So the roots aren't exactly screaming life. It's revolving around death, around spirits, and as Christians, of course, we follow a living God, so we don't necessarily put our faith into something as that screams death. So the roots of Halloween would turn people away. Dressing up as the devil and other evil things, there's a lot of that going on, and these are real concepts, and we don't want to associate ourselves with a holiday that would support dressing up as serial killers or other very demonic things. We don't do that. The message, of course, isn't of the gospel, so we're less likely to associate ourselves. Again, it's about associating yourselves with things of the demonic. Christ isn't represented. Christ is not. The name devil is mentioned more in Halloween than Jesus. You don't see Jesus mentioned. You don't see God. You see the devil, you see 666, you see demons, you see these dark concepts, real concepts mentioned more. And people also don't really want to associate themselves with that kind of stuff, so they just stay out. And these sometimes are more personal reasons, personal convictions as to why someone wouldn't necessarily participate. And you'll hear them from those who are just hard no. And the very important thing I want to mention is that these are completely valid reasons as to why one would not participate in Halloween. And as Christians, we are representations, images of God. And so a God who gives life. So it's only natural to just see these reasons and be like, nope, Keep that away from me. I don't want anything to do with it. Dressing up as the devil is not something we want to do. And the message isn't of the gospel. And so, from the pagan traditions of Halloween, most wouldn't want to be uh, a part of a tradition or Halloween as like that is rooted and foundationally, the principle is of paganism. And so, some scriptures, and I'm going to read them out, that while they don't say don't celebrate Halloween explicitly, they give us some type of guidance. And I want to mention the scripture so that you have some scriptural backing if you're someone who doesn't want to, if you're someone who does. And so Deuteronomy 8:9-14, when you enter the land of the Lord your God is giving you, do not learn to imitate the detestable ways of the nations there. Let no one be found among you who sacrifices their son or daughter in fire, who practices divination or sorcery, interprets omens, engages in witchcrafts or casts spells, or who is a medium or spiritist, or who consults the dead. Anyone who does these things is detestable to the Lord. Because of these same detestable practices, the Lord your God will drive out those nations before you. You must be blameless before the Lord your God. Basically, in this verse, he says, look, I'm taking out these people for this reason, this reason, this reason, and this reason. Don't become the thing I'm pushing out. Don't become the thing that I'm clearly against. We have a problem with it now. Don't all of a sudden start, letting these things enter your life, because, well, guess what? The same way I casted them out, I'm gonna have to cast you out from this area, because I'm a God of life and a God of who follows righteous things, not the darkness. Ezekiel 44:23. They are to teach my people the differences between the holy and the common, and show them how to distinguish between the unclean and the clean. This stuff is very unclean, very clearly. 1 Corinthians 10:21. You cannot drink the cup of the Lord and the cup of demons too. You cannot have a part in both the Lord's table and the table of demons. You can't put your foot in both areas. Right? So if this is clearly something, and that's why it's kind of torn, because either you drink not from the cup of demons, you'll see later on why you're not always drinking from the cup of demons, but these are the scriptures in which, if you are a hard no, you don't want to take part in it, you stay away. And while everyone who participates isn't drinking from the cup of demons, if you're personally convicted that this is a very demonic holiday, you can't have both. And so that's why they wouldn't, right? That's why they would say, look, hard no. And those who really want nothing to do with Halloween aren't to be looked at as some, really conservative Christians. What I've seen is that those who do it, it's like, oh man, they're taking it too seriously. They're not, it's not that deep, but that's not something as Christians we do. Right? If they are personally convicted, I've laid out the scripture, I've laid out the reasons, and because they are completely valid, how can you yourself just look at them and be like, whoa, that's not right? If you were doing that, we have a bigger problem than Halloween. If you're the one looking down on other Christians who say, look, hard no, I don't want anything to do with it. That is, that's not something we do. And so now the second question of why would Christians in the first place participate in Halloween? Celebrate or participate? I wouldn't say they celebrate, but participate in Halloween. And so there's a number of views, right? And I condense these views because it's the views that are mentioned in this question specifically. There's only two, right? And because there's two and there's less than the previous question doesn't mean that this one is worthless. It's just that these two views specifically are important, and there's more, and I'll be more than happy to discuss it if you have a question in the comments, or think that you want to go back and forth, or you want to add to the conversation. More than happy for you to do. First reason is Halloween isn't really what it was before. It's defined differently, and as a result, it's not something that if you take part in it or participate, that you're participating in what it once was before. So dressing up and collecting candy also isn't inherently sinful. The idea of dressing up, if you are not dressing up as the devil or dressing up as a serial killer, Hitler, right? It's not like it's sin directly, right? And like the previous questions, these are also very valid. And we shouldn't, as Christians, if you are that hard no, I don't want nothing to do with Halloween, and you see someone who's participating and is a Christian, you shouldn't come down on them as well, because to be honest, there's both sides, and you'll see later on, and I know there's probably going to be a conservative Christian who's completely against it and probably will have no point that they'd love to mention. And fine, right? But these are valid reasons as to why one would even participate. It's not the same. It's not that it's not deep. It's not that it's not that serious. It is that serious, which we'll see. But it's not the same. It's defined differently than what the origins I mentioned. And so, if now you're probably mentioning, and this is a question that's been constantly asked, is basically, now what do we do, right? There's valid reasons on either side. So then, should Christians participate? Is that a hard yes, hard no? And so, if I say this with certainty, if you're on the fence of it, if this is something you're not sure, I'd say with certainty, this is not like a yes or no. If you're someone who doesn't participate, stop participating. But if you're on the fence, you're not sure, don't participate in it. The default answer for this question should be no, because your heart has to be in the right place first. So staying away is the default answer, because staying away is better than participation unknowingly, right? Don't unknowingly participate in this. And while trick-or-treating isn't sinful, that's we mentioned, right? And while this may not be a clear-cut opinion, but while this isn't sinful, and while one area isn't sinful, I want you to be aware of the consequences of what may happen. It isn't like it's the most life environment in the world. And while you won't get burned participating in it, right, getting close to that fire, getting really close, right, you may not get burned, but there's a real and a larger possibility that you might. So when you go into things like Halloween, please make sure that the fire is real, right? Are there any costumes that can't be worn? Obviously, don't go dressing up as Hitler, or real serial killers. And this isn't to stop your free speech. We just don't want to support people who have just been so terrible and sinners, and give them any, spotlight. And one thing I want to mention, if you are participating in Halloween, the same way God is real, the enemy is real, the devil is real. 1/3 of the angels went with the devil when he, rebelled against God. They became demons. Demons are real. Numbers like 666, that's real. Hell is real, and there is a real consequence, right? So when you participate in these things, know that there is a real consequence to it. In the same way that we should refrain from putting ourselves these real concepts of something as fun, right? They don't have power, and and while they do have power, but it's not the level of power of God, and so they aren't meaningless. They have meaning, right? It just is the negative kind. And when you put against a really, 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 really third power, God, it does seem kind of meaningless. He is a very powerful God, that's clear. And so, with these deep political concepts of what we're approaching, right? You see what we've seen, I want to point out something I thought was interesting in the study. It's always important to know that your house is filled. And the reason why I mentioned that, I'm going to discuss it a little bit more. Matthew 12:43 through 45, right? I'm going to read the scripture. When an impure spirit comes out of a person, it goes through arid places seeking rest and did not find. Then it says, I will return to the house I left. When it arrives, it finds the house unoccupied, swept clean and put in order. Then it goes and takes with it 7 other spirits more wicked than itself, and they go in and they live there. And the final condition of that person is worse than the first. That is how it will be with this wicked generation. Basically saying, right, when Jesus cast out demons, right, when you come to him, you have this spirit inside of you that is not of God. He comes and he casts out the demon. Right, your house is now clean. There isn't, it's all tidied up, it's cleaned. But after that, what happens is that people they leave it clean. But it's clean and it's empty. And what happens is that demon comes back. He comes up with 7 other demons. Checking if anyone's there, and he realizes very quickly, hey, this place is nice and clean now, but it's empty, right? And so what's better, right? And right? Obviously, a clean and tidy house is better than one occupied with a demon that is dirty. But afterwards, what's better than a clean and tidy house, right? What's worse than a house that is clean and tidy and empty is a house clean and tidy occupied by the wrong thing. So in basically what the end of the scripture basically tells us is that you must have God occupy in your house, right? After the demons have left, after the demons are gone, right? They're gonna come back and bring more. When they see that God is in that house, they're gonna run. They're gonna run. They don't want anything to do with something of God, because well, God is the reason, right? The thing that they want to take down. And so yes, Christians can dress up and celebrate and collect candy, but your heart must be in the right place. Your house must be filled with the right person. And so most holidays, I'm going to mention this very briefly, most holidays, let's be honest, if you research it and put in, do a quick Google search even, has pagan roots and traditions. Christmas, for example, Festival Dies Natiles Solis Invicti, butchered, that a lot. But that holiday specifically from the Romans was a pagan holiday, and like many other holidays, the church repurposed it. And so when you see things like the birthdays, that has pagan roots. And so if you're ruling out Halloween purely because the roots were defined as paganism, then you should rule out a lot of things. And I will also like to mention that if you're gonna hold Halloween up to these standards of, well, I don't want to associate myself with the world. Well, to be honest, your job may even associate itself with the world. You ever look into what your job values, right? They may not value the Christian stuff. So then that is kind of more the world, right? There's a lot of things that we do, and we can apply this to a question. And I want to bring it back to what I originally mentioned. You can apply this video beyond just Halloween, because well, think about like rap music. Sometimes there's curse words. That sound very Christian-like, or it's supposedly by those who have a hard no against it. So it's about heart. Know where your heart is. Read your word. Dive deeper into prayer. And so learning that, understanding that, diving a little deeper into what's right, what's wrong, or learn it for yourself is something I'd do. You can go to your church, look to your pastor. What is your church saying? What is your pastor saying? Is something that I think we should get used to the habit of doing. So since scripture doesn't properly say no against Halloween, it really comes down to the basics of, does this put God in bad light, good light? We represent Christ. Never forget it. And so, the main thing I really want you to get out of this video specifically is understanding the level of discernment needed for participating in Halloween. If you are someone who October 31st will be going around trick-or-treating and dressing up in costumes, is that your house must be filled with the right person. Read your scripture. Look to a close group of people, close group of friends for the answer. And if you're someone who doesn't want anything to do with it, that is perfectly fine. Don't celebrate it. It's not a bad thing. It's not something that should be looked down upon. So if you're a person who does participate, or you should pray for discernment, to know what not to take part in. Of course, trick-or-treating and dressing up isn't sinful, but there are acts that you can commit that are sinful. Understand the roots of others, where they may be coming from, and remember that you are representing Christ. And like the previous comments, don't look down on others who have a hard no against it. Always remember, on the either side, we have more in common than we do have disagreements, and the logic throughout this episode, again, can be used in other cases. And so this episode was definitely my longest. I think we're clocking in at 30 minutes versus the usual 20. So I hope that while this was brief and I think a little quick, because we could definitely dive a little deeper, which I'm sure we will, Somewhere in the episode you can use it to discern, to decide, and to understand what to do. Thanks a bunch for listening. I'll catch you in episode 5, which I believe I'm scheduled for why do denominations exist, which I'm really excited about. So I'll see you in the next episode. As usual, I love you all. See you soon.
Good God, oh, you be good God. You just show yourself. You be good God. Good God, oh, you be good God. You just show yourself. You be good God.
Say you be good God. There's no mountain to tall that you won't climb. No shadow to dark that you won't light. Oh, am I that you keep me inside your mind? And I can't count the many